guys, welcome back to LS Vintage Design. I'm Lisa. I'm glad you're here today. Today we are talking all about vintage clothing, vintage fashion. And I'm just going to kind of touch some of the areas that are really hot, that are more valuable. I'm also going to talk about what constitutes vintage clothing. And then we'll wrap it all up talking about designer or luxury vintage clothing or fashion. So let's just get into this video because it's going to be a good one. So I have a bunch of notes, so I'm going to refer to my notes as we talk just because I don't want to miss anything. First of all, what constitutes vintage clothing? And it's any clothing that's 20 years or older and it represents its era. You know, the time frame that it was made and worn. And so, believe it or not, the early 90s are now vintage. The late 90s are now vintage. Isn't that crazy? Not only are the 90s vintage, but 2000, 2001, 2002, and 2003 also qualify as vintage. So vintage clothing is from 2003 all the way back to 1923. Isn't that crazy? And then after 1923, that's antique fashion or antique clothing, because antique clothing is 100 years or more. So vintage clothing is from 20 to 100 years, and antique clothing or fashion is from 100 back. So just let that sink in a minute, that from 2003 back to 1923, that's all vintage clothing. I wouldn't have thought what I wore in 2000 was vintage, or what I wore when my daughter was born in the early 90s is vintage, but it totally is vintage, and it really makes you feel old. I'm not gonna lie. So that's what we're going to be talking about today, is vintage clothing. And I want to start with denim, specifically Levi's, because Levi's, everybody knows about Levi's, okay? Everybody knows about vintage Levi's. It's just a thing. Even people that don't know vintage Levi's. But what do you know about vintage Levi's? Maybe a thing here or there, but maybe not a lot. Okay, so the things that you may know is if you look at the inside seam, it'll have a single line if it's vintage and worth something. If it has double lines in this, what's called a selvage, then it's not worth anything. Okay, you may know that. And you may know if you look on the pocket of a pair of Levi's and it has the little red tag on the pocket and it's all caps, that's worth something as well. If it has a little e, it's not. But those are the things everybody knows. Do you know what jeans of Levi's are actually considered the ones you want, the most valuable? I'm going to tell you. It's the 501, the 505, and the 517. And if you're really lucky, it's the 606. But you didn't even know there was a 606. Okay. So let's go into what each one of those jeans is, okay? And I'm going to be kind of flipping back and forth. The 501 was introduced in the 1890s. So that's actually, if you find an original 501, that's an antique pair of jeans. They're medium high-rise and they have button flies. The 505 is a zip fly version of the 501, has slim straight legs, and it launched in the 1960s. The 517 is a zip fly inspired by the 505s with a boot cut silhouette, or it's the cowboy jean. And the 606 is an incredibly flattering, the OG skinny jean. Okay? So keep those in mind. Now, let's say you're out and you're thrifting and you find a pair of 505 jeans, Levi jeans. How do you know Okay, one, the red tab we just talked about. The selvage or the inseam, and the inseam is always the seam inside the leg, not on the outside, but inside. That's why it's called an inseam. If it's a single line versus double or stitching, okay? But what are some other ways? Well, there's only 3 ways to identify vintage Levi's. Check for the red tab on the right back pocket, not the left, the right. Is the word Levi's all caps? If so, they're before 1971. Look for care tags. Did you know care tags were not added until the 70s? So all these tags we have in our clothes that we rip out because they're scratchy and annoy us, those were there in the 70s. I wish they'd go back to that. I like that some clothes actually have. That's a nice thing. And the style of the inseam. Before mid-1980s, a single stitch running down the inner thigh. So, but you can't go off of just one thing. You have to have a culmination of things, okay? Now, how much are they worth? That depends on your exact pair, the condition, and the market at the time. Because like anything, when you're trying to value something, it depends on that exact point in time in the market. Okay. So, what is more valuable than other? What should you look for if you're on the hunt for the holy grail of Levi jeans? What should you look for? Well, dark denim is worth more than faded. Selvage edges inside cuff instead of sewn. That means when you look at this inseam, this selvage is this right here on this pair of jeans. There's double stitching. You can see it's stitched in, right? Okay, if they're vintage Levi's, it won't have that stitching. It'll be just loose on both sides. All right. Another thing to look for is the double rivets inside the jeans. You can't see them on the outside, but you can see them inside. If you take them off and you look at the back pockets, there's double rivets on a pocket. One rivet. You can't see them from the outside. That's a way to tell. Leather patch. That Levi's patch on the back of all Levi's jeans? If it's paper, they're not worth so much. If it's leather, they're worth more. Adjustable belt on the back, and it has like little elastics on the side, like little kid pants. But adults, those are worth more. So that's how you can tell vintage denim, your age, the age of the denim, and some value to it. Of course, if you find something and you really want to know, reach out. There's a lot of good denim appraisers. Reach out to me through my vintage website. I'll be happy to talk to you. But I do charge. Sorry. Okay. So what are some other vintage fashions that are kind of like in demand? And should we look for them? Should you look for them? That's up to you. Do you have space to store them? Do you want to put them in a resale shop? Whatever, everybody's their own person. Maybe you want to wear them. That's awesome too. Maybe you just want to keep them because they remind you of your mom or your grandmother. Or you just love the time period. But what are some more really in demand vintage styles? The mid-century day dresses. Those were the little dresses that Miss Leave It to Beaver, June Cleaver wore, where it's a fitted little top at the top and then it goes off into a full skirt. Those are very in demand, and they're hard to find because they didn't survive. You have to remember, these are clothes these women were wearing every day. So when they wore out, they would be maybe torn into rags, maybe donated, or maybe just thrown away. Vintage cowboy hats. Okay, I am not kidding you on this one. Vintage cowboy hats, because back in the 50s, the cowboy aesthetic, rodeos, just all that was a big, big thing. Here's the deal. Condition plays a part in everything I'm telling you, okay? If it's in good condition, if it doesn't have stains, all that's very important. But cowboy hats especially, if they have that inside sweaty stain from somebody, they're not going to be worth much. If they're missing the band on the outside, they're not going to be worth much. But cowboy hats, Another thing, the original, the OG Lucite handbags, not these knockoffs, the original Lucite handbags. But keep in mind, not a lot of them survived. They were very brittle. They, think how hard we are on our bags. Same 40, 50 years ago, okay? Jazz era beaded dresses. Okay, now this is getting, if it's after 1923, it's antique. Before 1923, it's vintage. So when was the jazz era? Can anybody tell me? Anybody? The 1920s, 1930s. It's the flapper dresses. It's the ones when they danced, they went all over. I would love to have one. Those are in hot demand. But again, those were, people were out dancing, the beads flying off right and left, and they just didn't survive. So if you find one in good condition, you're probably looking at $50 to $150 in a resale shop. But if you're looking just to create a look, they're priceless. Leather shoes. Women's leather shoes, men's leather shoes, kids' leather shoes. Popular, remember, I think they were called saddle shoes. But also keep in mind, everybody's feet were way smaller back 40, 50 years ago. I don't know, we all grew. Silk shawls. Now this falls under antiques. These are Victorian piano shawls, okay? And they're in demand because they're silk, they're embroidered, they're just a lot of detail, very fine, high-end. Think high-end. 1960s mod dresses. These are the color block, the crazy patterns, and they were the mini dresses. Very popular. The ladies would wear them with the high boots. Boho chic. Think 70s. The flowers, the jumpsuits with the wide bell-bottom legs. Hot demand. And then, of course, you have your outerwear. Jackets, guys. Letterman's jackets. Vintage Letterman's jackets, if they're in great shape, are hot. If they're in good shape, they're hot. Bomber jackets. Think members-only jackets from the 80s. Where's my Gen X babies? And the green army jacket M65 from the Vietnam War. That is one of the most popular jackets, male and female. Just let that soak in. What I'm telling you is popular. It's kind of crazy sometimes. Now let's talk about our luxury brands that are vintage, our vintage luxury brands that hold up as good today as they did 50 years ago. Hermes, Chanel. Think about the movies, the one, they're always in the hotels, and the ladies always look so nice, and they have the little short skirt with the matching jacket, and the pillbox hat, and the purse. Chanel, okay, that look. Gucci, Dior, Vivienne Westwood, Oscar de la Renta, Yves Saint Laurent, Comme des Garçons, sorry, not French. Those are all very hot, and those are in your luxury realm, okay? Yeah, vintage fashion is a big deal. Look at it this way. How many people now go thrifting and you're excited to find Grandpa's jacket? You know the one that's a plaid, a tiny plaid all over, or you find Grandpa's trench coat. These are all popular. Grandpa's vest, his sweater vest that he wore. Very popular fashion. These you can find in thrift stores. Sometimes you can find some of this other stuff, but I will tell you the thrift stores are getting smarter. They are getting smarter, and either they're selling the more high-end stuff online, or they're keeping it for themselves, or they're selling it to maybe a resale shop that's contacted them, I don't know. I'm sure they have policies about that, but at the same time, we know how big business works. So anyway, guys, that is what vintage fashion is all about. And let me state too, Let me state too that there's a lot of retro fashion out there, and retro fashion is new fashion that's made to look old. So remember to look for your cues in care tags. It doesn't matter what. If it was Levi's, mod dress, whatever. If it was made after 1970, it's got care tag. 1970s, it's got care tags in it. How to wash it, how to dry it, all that. If it doesn't have those and you don't see where they've been pulled out, because even if we pull them out, you can see where they were. Okay? Then it's true. If it's made to look old, but it's got those tags, it's not old. You can also tell by the seams, the sewing, the stitching. Okay? So do be careful, because there is people out there that try to dupe good people all the time. Know what you're looking at, know what you're looking for, and know how to look for it. Thanks for being here at LS Vintage Design today. If you like this video, please be sure and give it a thumbs up. Also, be sure and hit that subscribe button and that little bell. And hopefully, I can get out to the store tomorrow and we can have our fruity baked chicken for episode 4 of Cooking Vintage. And guys, because of the weather, I'm going to push Cooking Vintage back from Friday to Saturday just to make sure I can get to the store and get everything I need. So please be patient with me this week. Like I said, it's going to be pushed back just one day. So Cooking Vintage episode 4, our fruity baked chicken, will be on Saturday this month. Will be on Saturday this week. Again, thank you for being here and take care. Bye.